Somewhere in a lively neighborhood, a young man was practically sprinting down the street, desperately trying to make up for the fact that, as usual, he was running late. His name was Ju In-gong, which in Korean literally meant protagonist. On this particular day, he burst into the local video game shop, where the two shopkeepers, who had known him since childhood, immediately teased him about his dramatic entrance. Ju brushed it off, told them to quit the roasting, and quickly got to the real reason he had come. He asked if the game had arrived, and the shopkeeper, grinning, said he had saved one copy just for him. This game was steeped in old-school fantasy, centered on the struggle between humans and demons. Players could choose between Locke, the traditional human hero, and Zephyr Ragnaros, eldest son of the Demon King, with each path filled with epic quests, hidden secrets, and dangerous adventures. Ju had played through the series countless times since he was a child, so he already knew every twist and turn of the story. With this new VR remake, however, the excitement was on another level, and he could hardly wait to experience it. By the time he arrived home, he was barely through the door before tearing open the case. He popped out the small drive, strapped on his VR headset, and, looking like some strange cyborg preparing for launch, declared to himself that he would play for only 8 hours this time, a promise that sounded less like restraint and more like wishful thinking. With that, he dove straight in. When he next opened his eyes, he was lying in bed, staring up at a window shaped like an eye, and he knew instantly that he was inside the game. Yet, when he looked down, he realized he could not even tell which character he was supposed to be. And before he could process the situation, a voice outside the tent shouted for him to get up. A moment later, a chubby green orc poked his head inside, urging him to hurry because there was work to be done. Ju marveled at how realistic everything looked, speaking aloud in wonder about the unbelievable graphics. The orc stared at him in puzzlement, clearly not understanding his excitement. Ju, however, was delighted to discover that he could actually converse with the NPCs, a feature far beyond what the advertisements had promised. He asked for the orc's name, and the creature that looked slightly insulted introduced himself as Karak. Then, as he stepped out of the tent, he added that everyone was already waiting, Prince Shutra. The title made Ju pause. It took only a moment for him to realize he had been placed into the role of Shutra Ignis, the 9th son of the Demon King. What unsettled him most was that he had not even been given the chance to choose his character. He waved his hand instinctively, and a glowing status window appeared before him. The disappointment was immediate. The stats were abysmal, even worse than those of a typical NPC, hardly befitting a prince of royal blood. Yet one detail lifted his spirits. 2 skills appeared in the list, one called Conquest, and the other intriguingly labeled Protagonist Setting Adjustment. Karak returned to rush him again, so Ju followed him outside, only to be greeted by a shocking sight. An entire army of green orcs stood in formation, lined up as though they were extras on the set of a medieval war film. Ju asked Karak if they were going into battle, but Karak dismissed his nonsense and explained that their mission for the day was to deal with the Scarlet Lightning tribe. The revelation made Ju's stomach tighten, for it sounded very much like war, especially when Karak raised his axe and rallied the troops, declaring that it was time for their first real battle. Ju, trembling inside, wondered why there had been no tutorial. The Scarlet Lightning tribe had staged a rebellion, and now it was the duty of Shutra, the 7th prince, and the 8th princess to suppress it. Yet, to Ju's surprise, the army marching out consisted of only 10 people, which seemed like a deeply flawed strategy for quelling an uprising. Karak, growing suspicious of his odd behavior, asked if Ju had eaten something strange the night before. Unbothered, Ju pulled up the game's mini-map and immediately noticed a hidden path. Certain it had to be an event trigger, he confidently led the group through the forest, while Karak struggled with his clumsy paper map. Eventually, the group stumbled upon a massive green stone door. Karak was stunned that Ju had discovered such a place, but Ju himself still felt like a powerless beginner. He ordered the others to check whether the door would open, but before he knew it, he was engulfed in magical flames. To his astonishment, a message appeared declaring he had leveled up. Every stat had risen by 2 points, and he had received 2 additional bonus points besides. For the first time, Ju began to think he truly did have the luck of a protagonist. Karak quickly urged everyone onward, and the door gave way to reveal a dark tunnel. Karak speculated that the dwarves must have built it long ago before their mysterious disappearance, but there was no time to dwell on that. The orcs soon discovered piles of gold and weapons scattered throughout the passage. While they rejoiced at their luck, Ju struggled with the fact that he was too weak to lift even the smallest sword. Out of curiosity, he tried touching a dagger while thinking about storing it, and to his surprise, it vanished into his inventory. His triumph was short-lived. Red dots suddenly appeared on the mini-map, and he shouted for the group to retreat. Almost instantly, a beam of crimson light burst through the cave wall, hurling the orcs aside. A barefooted red orc general Kaichan stepped through the dust, mocking them for their pathetic attempt at stealth. With a cruel laugh, he ordered his soldiers to slaughter everyone, and to prove his intent, he killed one of the green orcs on the spot. Panic swept through Ju's group. Clutching a flimsy sword, Ju hesitated, unsure of his role, before deciding that the safest plan was to try stealing a few kills for experience points. He crept behind a red orc and struck, but his sword shattered instantly. The enemy turned on him with murderous rage, and Ju fled, only to trip over a stone and fall. He was struck hard, his health dropping to a single point. The red orc loomed above, hand raised for the killing blow, and Ju screamed with his eyes shut. At the last second, Karak intervened, swinging his axe and shouting for Ju to run. The shock of near death left Ju's hands trembling. It was only a game, yet everything felt disturbingly real. He resolved to quit for now and tried to bring up the menu, but when he checked, there was no option to log out. His stomach dropped. Could he actually be trapped inside? Kaichan, after slaying another of the green orcs, leveled his staff at Ju and unleashed a torrent of blazing skulls. Ju tried to dodge, but the magic slammed him against the wall. His vision dimmed, the game announced his health at 0, and the words, "Game over," flickered before his eyes. Suddenly, Ju found himself floating in a strange, shadowy expanse, more like a trippy liminal void than anything he had ever seen, and for a moment he couldn't even piece together what had happened. He was fairly certain the red orcs had just finished him off, which could only mean one thing. He was dead. Before the thought could fully sink in, a blinding light burst through the darkness, flooding everything with brilliance. A voice rang out, deep and angelic, echoing as though the entire void itself was speaking. An angel appeared before him, radiant and overwhelming, pointing straight at him with a command that was as grand as it was terrifying. He must conquer, enslave, and rule. Ju barely managed to lift his hand when the light swelled again, and in the blink of an eye, both the angel and the message were gone. Meanwhile, back on the battlefield, things could not have looked worse. The red orcs were carving through the green ranks, and Kaichan, at the front, mocked them for their pathetic numbers. His command was merciless: wipe them all out, leave none alive. Yet just as the slaughter seemed inevitable, the fallen prince reappeared nearby. Kaichan froze, his sneer faltering. He demanded to know if this was some kind of awakening, confused at how his opponent had returned from the dead. Ju felt sore and dazed, but a game notification snapped him into focus. He had unlocked a new ability, telekinesis, and with it a completely new subclass, Knight of Conquest. He had no idea where this sudden gift had come from, but in his mind he was already grateful, because whatever it meant, he was still alive. Kaichan wasted no time, ordering his minions to cut Ju down once and for all. Karak, however, was struck speechless at the sight of the prince's return. He quickly rallied the remaining green orcs, forming a protective wall around Ju, as though they instinctively knew something had changed. Ju himself stood awkwardly, clutching a broken sword, his mind racing. The title Knight of Conquest had never existed in the original game. In desperation, he drove his shattered blade into the ground. Instantly, words and spells began echoing through his thoughts, knowledge flowing into him as if he had always possessed it. He realized then that the power of conquest was more than a skill, it was the very essence of a king's dominion. He sent out a wave of magic, declaring all around him to be under the banner of the king. His allies surged with newfound energy, strengthened as though they had been reborn. The transformation was immediate. The green orcs, who only moments earlier had been collapsing under the red assault, now charged with ferocity. Their strikes landed heavier, their movements sharper, their will unshakable. The battlefield turned, and Kaichen, who had been sneering only minutes ago, now broke into a cold sweat. He hurled burning skulls toward Ju, but Karak, glowing with strength from the buff, smashed them aside as if they were nothing but sparks. "Ju, overcome with adrenaline," shouted encouragement, and Carrick roared in answer before rushing forward. With a single monstrous swing, he cleaved through the Red General, severing his head in one decisive strike. The sight shattered the morale of the Red Orcs, who fled in terror, leaving the field to the green. The game's message appeared before Ju. The general's merits had been claimed for his king. His level jumped, not once but several times in succession. For the first time since this bizarre ordeal began, Ju felt like he was standing on solid ground. That night, however, reality set in. At camp, staring at the fire, Ju tried again to find the menu option to log out. No matter how many times he searched, it wasn't there. His stomach twisted as he weighed the possibilities. Either this was a catastrophic bug, or, as impossible as it seemed, this was not a game at all, but another reality, one where death might be permanent. Everything felt too real. The ground beneath his feet, the voices of the orcs, even the exhaustion pulling at his body. The thought was terrifying, yet at the same time he reminded himself of one small comfort, the fact that, at least he was a prince, not some nameless grunt. His thoughts were interrupted when Carrick approached, as serious as ever. He asked if the prince could spare a moment, then led him out to a flat stretch of ground under the night sky. To Ju's confusion, Carrick explained that they would spar. He needed to test his leader's abilities, to see for himself what kind of strength the young prince truly possessed. Tossing Ju a wooden sword, he promised to take it easy. Ju's blood stirred with excitement. Gripping the sword tightly, he charged, only to watch his strikes bounce harmlessly off Carrick's hulking frame. The orc hardly budged, standing like an immovable boulder. Finally, with a sigh, Carrick pushed forward, knocking Ju flat on his back. Ju cried out in protest, reminding him he had promised to go easy, but before he could say more, a notification appeared. In that instant, Ju realized his growth wasn't going to come from grinding monsters or completing quests. His skills advanced when he lived through them, directly, painfully, and completely. Karak, satisfied, declared the sparring finished. Ju, however, clambered to his feet, eyes blazing with defiance. He tightened his grip on the wooden blade and grinned. He wasn't done yet, and this was only the beginning. Ju charged again, his attack bouncing harmlessly off Carrick's solid defense, but this time he noticed something. His movements were sharper, his footing more steady. He even caught himself wondering why he had been so shaky at the start. Another strike, another block, yet instead of stumbling back he landed squarely and grinned, proud of his progress. Curious, he asked Carrick what level he was. Carrick simply shrugged and admitted he was at 21 the last time he checked. Ju pulled up his own status window and saw he was level 7. The best part was that everyone in this world technically had a level, but unlike him, they could not just check it whenever they wanted. They needed a special measuring spell to do that. His ability to view and upgrade his stats at will was nothing short of a cheat. With renewed determination, he lunged at Karak once more. In his mind, he promised himself that he would get stronger, strong enough to surpass everyone and stand above them all. His thoughts drifted back to the demon tribe arc in Night Saga. Zephyr's entire story revolved around crushing his siblings and seizing the throne of the Demon King. There were many pivotal moments, but none more infamous than the day of massacre. That brutal event would unfold in the year 517 of the Demon Realm calendar, when Zephyr slaughtered every one of his siblings to secure absolute power. That included the prince. It was only the year 512 now. Ju had 5 years to change the course of history, and he knew the only way to do that was by becoming stronger than Zephyr himself. Ju was startled when Karak appeared behind him, clearly irritated that he had slipped away without a word. Karak reminded him of the meeting he had forgotten and told him that everyone was already waiting. Soon after, Ju was back at camp, sitting on his royal chair with a cup of tea in hand, surrounded by his siblings. Chris Moonlight, the seventh prince, leaned back and suggested that since they were family, they should speak casually. Before Ju could reply, the eighth princess, Caitlin Moonlight, cut in. She pointed out that it was actually the first time they had met face to face. Chris brushed it off and told Ju to simply call them brother and sister. Ju agreed, though he silently remembered something from the original game. Both Chris and Caitlin were children of Queen Elaine Moonlight, the queen of the lycanthropes, and in Night Saga they had been a thorn in his side at every turn. Tragically, both had been killed a year before the day of massacre by Zephyr and the Demon King's loyalists. Their deaths had come about because of Caitlin's secret. She was not truly the Demon King's daughter. Caitlin suddenly confronted Ju about his reckless move in the previous battle. She demanded to know why he had ignored the plan. He admitted he had not expected them to arrive at all. She then pulled him aside, checking his face for injuries, and reminded him that he was the weakest of them all. He needed to be careful. Ju could not help but wonder why she was treating him kindly when the Demon King's children were supposed to be locked in constant rivalry. Chris, however, was not amused. He sternly warned Ju that if he pulled another reckless stunt, the consequences would be severe. Ju was taken aback by how reasonable they were acting. A plan began forming in his mind. Lycanthropes were famous for their aura abilities, so perhaps he could gain aura for himself if he experienced it directly. With a grin, he asked if they could strike him with their aura. The request stunned everyone into silence, and both Chris and Caitlin shouted in disbelief at the same time. The scene shifted abruptly. The sun was setting over a battlefield filled with red orcs. The carnage was brutal, reminding Ju of Kaichan's fight. Massive orcs swung their axes, beheading smaller, human-like enemies. One of the smaller enemies managed to scratch the giant's elbow, which only enraged him further. In a savage display, he smashed the poor soul into the ground with his axe, pulverizing him completely. This red orc, who looked eerily like Karak's twisted double, barked orders for the slaughter to continue. Before long, a band of green orcs stormed into the fray, and the battlefield erupted into chaos, filled with explosions, clashing weapons, and the cries of war. Suddenly, Ju was back in the liminal space. The angel appeared once more, but this time she was not alone. Figures cloaked in shadow stood nearby, unfamiliar characters that he had never seen in Night Saga. He tried to study them. The angel drew closer. The brightness swelled until everything went white. When his vision cleared, he was in bed, clutching his head, uncertain whether he had just dreamed within a dream. His heart skipped when he opened his eyes to see Karak's green face hovering just inches from his own, watching intently. Karak asked why he had begged the princess to strike him with her aura, explaining that she had refused at first, but eventually gave in to his persistence. The result was clear. A faint aura now swirled around Ju, and the game confirmed he had unlocked the skill at level 1. He could actually feel it, alive and pulsing. Karak was stunned. The impact of the aura had awakened Ju's own power, just as the battle against the Lightning Tribe had triggered his earlier surge. Ju, still processing, asked what had happened while he was asleep. Karak filled him in. Their main camp had fought and defeated the Lightning Tribe. Ju was surprised. He had assumed that was just his side mission, but Karak explained that the Red Lightning Tribe was formidable and not to be underestimated. What caught Ju's attention most, however, was the news that the Ogre General Vandal had taken command of the main camp. Vandal was a walking fortress, a one-man army whose name carried both fear and respect. Coincidentally, Vandal was also one of Ju's favorite characters from his Zephyr playthrough. At this point in time, Vandal had yet to pledge his loyalty to anyone, which meant Ju had a chance to recruit him first. He knew every detail about the ogre, from his favorite food to the tribute gifts that would impress him. Most importantly, he remembered that the only way to earn Vandal's allegiance was to defeat him in single combat. With that knowledge, Ju's path was clear. He clenched his fists, determination burning in his chest. Vandal would be his first target, and he would claim the ogre's loyalty before Zephyr ever had the chance. Over in Caitlyn's camp, Chris was practically ready to collapse from shock. Ju had managed to reach the very first level of aura expulsion in just a single day. Ju, on the other hand, only grinned smugly, convinced that of course he had achieved this, since he had poured all his precious points into aura. In his mind, aura made every physical ability stronger, and really, who needed telekinesis when you could simply become superhuman? Chris kept scratching his head, muttering that perhaps Ju's talent was because he was a Gangharva. He even wondered aloud if Shutra could create an underground map the way a spell might. Ju simply shrugged, knowing he did not exactly have his own minimap function, but he suggested that if they gave him a pen and paper, he could sketch one out himself. Minutes later, the group gathered inside the main tent, staring at the map spread across the table. Chris was floored. Ju's drawing had more detail than the official version, which made him start to question whether his younger brother was hiding the mind of a secret genius. At that moment, Caitlyn pointed out that all the Scarlet Lightning tribe warriors who had crossed their path had ended up dead, which meant no one else knew about these underground tunnels. Chris immediately seized on the idea, saying they could use this knowledge to set an ambush if they played their cards right. Before they could start planning, however, Chris gave Ju another assignment. Soon the prince was trekking through the mountains with his squad of green orcs. Karak assumed their job was the usual patrol, but Ju explained that, as the youngest sibling, he really had no choice but to follow orders. Karak did not complain, since they now had reinforcements and a much larger army behind them. Just as they began to relax, two cloaked figures appeared ahead of them. To no one's surprise, it was Caitlyn and her adjutant. Ju asked why they were dressed like that, but Caitlyn silenced him, explaining that she was tailing him in secret. She promised to step in only if things turned truly dangerous, since this mission needed to be Ju's accomplishment, not hers. The cloaked woman introduced herself as Sira, and Caitlyn reassured the prince that she and Sira would keep watch while he focused on his task. With the entire group assembled, they descended into the dark cavern with torches in hand. The dungeon's tunnels were eerily empty. Karak guessed that the dwarves had packed up their treasures and moved elsewhere, and when Ju asked about the weapons they had seen last time, Karak shrugged, saying dwarves probably had no interest in things of little value. As they pressed forward, Karak leaned close to whisper that something was coming. Even Ju could hear it now. He quickly checked his minimap, and sure enough, enemies were on the way. A glance at his inventory showed he still had a flash spell, which could come in handy. He grabbed the spell bottle and ordered Karak to warn the others to shut their eyes when he gave the signal. Tension thickened in the silence that followed. Moments later, a swarm of massive stone spiders with glowing red eyes poured into the tunnel, their fangs dripping with paralyzing poison. Ju wasted no time. He shouted for everyone to close their eyes and hurled the spell bottle overhead. It smashed against the rocky ceiling, raining down glowing fragments of yellow light. The spiders shrieked, their vision blinded by the sudden brilliance. Ju knew stone spiders were helpless when stripped of darkness, and he gave the command for the orc army to charge. Chaos exploded in the cavern. Spiders bit and lashed out, orcs swung their axes, and the clash echoed through the tunnels. From the rear, Ju studied his minimap. He remembered that stone spiders never fought without a leader, and sure enough, a larger mark pulsed on the map. He grabbed Karak and urged him to follow. Together they pushed through the melee toward a side chamber, where the monstrous spider boss emerged with an ear-splitting roar. Karak attacked immediately, leaping onto the beast and slamming his weapon down, but his eyes widened in disbelief when he realized the blow had barely scratched the monster's rock-like shell. Ju's stomach dropped as he remembered the boss's main weakness: fire. The spider's many eyes locked onto Karak, and a massive claw swung down to crush him. Ju shouted desperately that fire was the key, but Karak looked back, bewildered, with no idea how to conjure flames inside a cave. Then a voice rang out behind Ju, telling him to raise his sword. As he lifted it, flames flared along the blade, burning bright and hot. Relief swept through him. Someone had sent magical support. Caitlin stepped from the shadows, her face illuminated by the fire, and asked whether the flames were good enough for him. Before Ju could thank her, the spider's claw came crashing down. He braced himself, narrowed his eyes, and burst forward through the rubble. His sword ignited with the burning blade's skill, fire trailing in his wake as he slashed directly into the monster's glaring face. Flames licked up the sides of the spider boss, and Ju could not help staring at the sight. He felt genuinely impressed with his own swordplay and, if he was being honest, a little proud of how his aura was starting to show itself. Right on time, the system chimed in to announce that he had leveled up twice, bringing him to level 9. The rush of progress felt sweet. Caitlin, however, was not letting it go. She demanded to know what that burst of light had been. Ju tried to keep his composure and said it was just a blessing, nothing too serious, something connected to his Gandharva bloodline. He attempted to steer the conversation away, but Caitlin was still clearly impressed by the way he had handled the spiders. Before the awkward mood could settle in, Carrick called out with excitement. He had spotted something unusual in the cave wall. Together, the four of them pushed the stone aside and revealed a hidden chamber. The space inside looked as if it had leapt straight out of a fantasy novel, with a glowing town portal shining brilliantly at its center. Karak stared in confusion, wondering what it was, but Ju recognized it immediately. He explained that the design was dwarven, the sort of portal he had seen before when playing as the human hero, but never when he was Zephyr. He walked up to the orb and said that if they poured mana into it, the portal would likely activate. Caitlin asked if he was certain. Sarah stepped closer and agreed that the structure seemed correct. She added that there had to be an inscription nearby to explain the details. Almost as if on cue, Karak found a series of runes carved into the wall and called the others over. The script was definitely not demonic. It looked dwarven, so Karak asked Caitlin to read it. She glared at him, wondering why anyone would expect her to know dwarven. They turned to Sarah next, but she shook her head as well. To everyone's shock, it was Shutra who suddenly began reading the words aloud. Gishka Mountains, portal number 2, connected to portal number 3. Even he was stunned, since he had no idea how he was able to read Dwarven at all. The system answered the mystery by notifying him that he had just acquired the Dwarven language. The others kept asking questions, but Ju continued reading, explaining that the inscription said the portal would activate if infused with mana. He asked Caitlin to give it a try. She raised an eyebrow and told him to do it himself. Sheepishly, he admitted that he was still clumsy with mana, not to mention that he could not actually control it yet. Caitlin sighed, but she stepped forward and poured mana into the orb. At once, it blazed blue, and a vast, magical projection spun overhead. It was a glowing map of the Gishka Mountains. A bright point marked their position, with another showing the location of Portal 3. Karak muttered that it seemed like a lucky find, since the Scarlet Lightning tribe's main force was camped near those very mountains. Shutra agreed, pointing out that with this knowledge they could strike from behind. They decided to rest for the night and discuss plans in the morning. Back at camp, Chris embraced his younger brother proudly, congratulating him on finding the portal. He insisted that if Shutra wanted anything at all, he should just say so. Shutra politely declined, but Chris pressed him, saying he would be hurt if his younger brother refused a gift. Finally, Shutra blurted out his wish. Could Chris teach him the beast god fist art? Chris froze in surprise. Shutra explained quickly that while he was still weak with weapons, techniques were another matter. The beast god fist art was a legendary martial art passed down in the lycanthrope family, an S-rank ability, and he believed it was exactly what he needed. Chris gave him a long look, and then, to Shutra's amazement, agreed. He admitted that he could not reveal the most secret parts of the technique, but he would at least teach the aura foundation. Shutra fell silent for a moment, and Chris feared he was disappointed, but then he reassured his older brother that it was the perfect gift. Chris's grin widened. He asked if it was finally acceptable to consider each other true brothers. The word brother carried weight for Shutra, but he found himself liking the sound of it. He agreed, and they clasped hands, smiling at this new bond. The system chimed once again, announcing that their alliance had been sealed, at least for now. That night, far away near the mountains, the mood was far darker. At the Scarlet Lightning Tribe's camp, red orcs stood on guard outside a royal tent. Inside, a hulking monster cracked his knuckles and growled that coming here had been the worst possible decision. On the ground, chained and wounded, lay a princess. The brute turned to the sixth princess, Felica Doomblade, and demanded to know why she had come to this place at all. Meanwhile, Ju was busy checking over his stats, and one detail immediately caught his attention. His charisma was still the lowest of all his attributes. He remembered how, back when he first began, every time he leveled up, most of his stats would rise by 2 points, but charisma often only increased by 1, and he had never quite figured out the reason why. In the original Night Saga, appearance and charisma were treated as two entirely separate traits. Appearance reflected how attractive a character was, while charisma influenced how much people were inclined to like or follow them. Still, he thought it made sense. His growth overall was going smoothly, and more importantly, he was about to hit level 10, which marked a huge milestone. In Night Saga, whenever Zephyr or Locke reached that point, their unique skills, Zephyr's Descendant of Darkness and Locke's The Chosen One, would automatically improve as well. Ju could not help wondering if the same thing might happen for him, and whether one of his own abilities would be boosted. Before he could drift too far into speculation, Karak pushed his head through the tent flap to say that everything was ready. Ju stood up at once, and when Karak asked if something good had happened, he brushed it aside with a grin. Outside, he planted himself before the assembled Green Orc army and declared confidently that it was time to move. The march began through the forest toward the mountains, and before long the army came across a cave where a savage clash with monsters was already unfolding. Right there, beside the chaos, stood the entrance to the portal itself. Inside the portal chamber, the royal group had arrived earlier, and now stood watching as wolfish shamans examined the ancient structure. One of them confirmed that, just as Chris had said, this portal was linked to the Eska River in the Gishka Mountains. Chris asked if it was in proper working order, and the shaman replied that it was flawless, as sturdy as any dwarven craftsmanship could be. Pleased, Chris announced it was time to move. At his signal, the mages channeled a great surge of mana into the glowing orb, and soon the sphere flared bright blue. A vast oval of swirling light opened before them, revealing a gateway to the Gishka Mountains. The army murmured in awe, and Ju found himself utterly astonished, hardly believing he was about to step through a portal for the first time in real life. His sister gave him a playful nudge to stop staring and get moving, so he ended up being the last to step through. On the other side, they emerged into the red ridges of the Gishka Mountains. From their vantage point high above, Ju's eyes widened at the sight of the enemy encampment sprawling below. Chris looked delighted, quickly estimating that there were nearly 5,000 troops gathered. He outlined a plan. If they struck the supply line from the rear while General Vandal launched an assault from the front to create a distraction, their infiltrators could set fire to the enemy's food stores and throw the camp into disarray. Yet Sierra frowned and voiced her doubts. Something felt wrong. There were far too few troops stationed in the camp itself. At that very moment, a violent noise rose from the distance. Following Chris's advice, Ju focused his aura into his eyes and suddenly could see the distant battle in striking clarity. Caitlin noticed the combatants as well and pointed out that one force was clearly the Scarlet Lightning Tribe, but she could not identify the group opposing them. Chris agreed that they were not General Vandal's soldiers, and besides, this was not supposed to be a battle day. Ju leaned closer and realized that the women fighting the Red Orcs were mounted on reptilian beasts. He suggested that they might be dark elves. Caitlin asked why he thought so, and he explained that their bodies were slighter, and the draconic mounts were a signature sign. Chris studied the scene and remarked that the Dark Elves seemed to be in retreat, likely because their commander had been taken down, which would explain their rapid flight. Karuk muttered in amazement that the clash was already ending, while Ju wondered aloud what in the world the Dark Elves were even doing here. A short while later, when they had returned to camp, General Vandal appeared as a shimmering hologram. He congratulated Chris's forces for locating the portal. Chris quickly corrected him, giving full credit to Shutra, who accepted the recognition calmly as the general promised he would be properly rewarded once they returned to the Demon King's castle. Before ending the communication, Chris brought up the strange skirmish they had witnessed near the Lightning Tribe's camp. He asked if Vandal knew anything about it. The general admitted it was probably the work of the Dark Elves, and that they had apparently chosen to enter the battle on their own initiative. Chris pressed him further, wondering if they were meant to serve as reinforcements from the Demon King's castle. The general frowned and explained that it was difficult to say. The Dark Elves had originally been tasked with scouting before joining, but something had clearly gone wrong, and now there was an even larger issue to address. The leader of the independent Dark Elf unit had been captured by the Scarlet Lightning Tribe. Chris guessed that the reckless skirmish might have been an attempt to rescue their commander. Shutra cut in to ask the question that mattered most. Who exactly led that unit? The general paused before revealing the answer. It was someone they all knew well. The commander of the Dark Elf detachment was none other than their own sister, the sixth princess, Felicia Doomblade. Felicia, in case anyone had lost track of the family tree, was the daughter of Sylvia Doomblade, the third queen and princess of the Dark Elves. She was also the twin sister of the fifth prince, Sylvian Doomblade. In the original game, Felicia and Sylvian were almost always found at the side of the fourth princess, the cold and calculating strategist Anastasia Necreon. That association alone had been enough for Ju to peg Felicia as trouble from the very start, and his first impression of her had always been nothing but enemy energy. Now, standing here in this world, Ju could not help wondering what Felicia was doing in a place like this. Was she trying to grab glory and merit for herself, or was there some deeper motive at play? Chris, ever the big brother, turned to General Mandal and asked if the Scarlet Lightning Tribe even realized who they had captured. The general replied that the enemy had not yet confirmed her identity, which at least left some uncertainty for now. Chris pressed for a plan, unwilling to waste time. Mandal explained calmly that if they had a chance to rescue her, then of course they should, but if the Scarlet Lightning Tribe made the first move, then at least negotiations would remain an option. Still, the general made one thing absolutely clear. He had no intention of bowing his head to beg for a favor. That settled it. Mandal promised to investigate further and report any changes, then ended the virtual link, vanishing from sight. Chris smirked almost immediately, remarking that it seemed their brilliant older sister had managed to get herself captured, but Caitlin rounded on him, insisting that if Felicia was still alive, then saving her was non-negotiable. Chris, pragmatic as always, replied that it would certainly be nice, but the risks would be steep and the costs high. Caitlin's patience snapped, and she shouted back that it did not matter what the cost was. Felicia was their sister, and they had to act. Chris held her gaze for a long moment before sighing. He admitted he already knew that, but he pointed out there was still a problem, one that even left Ju staring in disbelief at the way his brother spoke. Later, inside Chris's tent, the three siblings gathered to settle on a plan. Chris explained it clearly. When General Mandal lured the Scarlet Lightning Tribe's main force away, they would circle around the back, strike at the heart of the camp, and spread as much confusion as possible. Caitlin would lead one squad, Shutra would command another, and each would be responsible for carrying out their part. Shutra asked directly whether that part meant rescuing Felicia. Chris confirmed it, explaining that after destroying the enemy's food supply, the real priority would be to break Felicia free. However, he added firmly that if the danger grew too great, their orders were to retreat immediately. He would not risk the lives of many for the sake of just one. Caitlin bristled at that, ready to argue again, But Chris cut her off, reminding her that he was a commander as well, and his duty was to think of the bigger picture. The siblings bickered while Ju listened quietly, growing more certain that Chris's reluctance meant there was more to this family drama than he yet understood. Midnight arrived under a sky streaked red as blood. Soldiers, both Wolverines and Green Orcs, lined up to receive their orders to strike the Scarlet Lightning tribe. From a cliff above, Chris surveyed the enemy camp, watching Red Orcs patrol in tight patterns. Then, right on cue, a massive explosion ripped through the base, toppling a section of troops. That was Mandal, making his grand entrance, bellowing for his soldiers to unleash chaos. Shutra and his squad crouched in the woods, waiting for the signal. Mandal's army tore into the Red Orcs with brutal precision, the general himself overseeing the battle with those piercing red eyes. At last, when he gave the order to retreat, Chris knew the moment had come. With a sharp nod, their own force charged straight into the fray. The Red Orcs were blindsided. Caitlin and Shutra exchanged a quick reminder to look out for each other before the fighting began, and for once the sentiment felt almost tender. Ju, ever the gamer at heart, pulled up his minimap and directed Karak to swing left. Their target was the food storage. Karak shouted encouragement to his men and personally split a monster in two with his axe. Out of nowhere, a Red Orc lunged at Karak from behind, ready to strike. Before it could land a blow, Ju whipped out his dagger and hurled it in a clean arc, the blade sinking into the creature's skull. His new dagger-throwing skill had triggered perfectly. Karak spun, stunned, demanding to know where Ju had learned such a move, but Ju only shrugged it off, insisting they had no time to waste. The truth was, he had picked it up just the night before while practicing for fun. They pushed forward and reached the food storage, prepared to torch it, but Ju froze. A thought struck him like lightning, wondering what if Felicia was being kept here. Setting the place on fire without checking would mean burning her alive, and that would be a disaster beyond repair. He quickly changed course, telling Carrick that their first task was to find her. Trusting his hunch, Ju opened his minimap, certain that Felicia would appear as a special marker. He motioned for Karak to follow, then burst into a tent that seemed like the right place. It was empty. He cursed under his breath, but before disappointment could take hold, a voice rang out behind him. She was there. Felicia was chained to the ground, her eyes burning with desperation as she demanded to know what on earth Shutra was doing in a place like this.
Without wasting a single second, Ju crouched down to untie Felicia, telling her firmly to hold her questions and keep quiet for now because this was hardly the place for conversation. His hands moved quickly, not only out of urgency but also because he understood perfectly well that having Felicia owe him a debt could be very useful in the future. She did not resist, sitting patiently as he worked, which was surprising for someone of her royal stature. Once the chains were removed, Ju led her outside and urged her to hurry back to Chris and Caitlin. Felicia stopped him for a moment, however, her voice tinged with disbelief as she admitted she could hardly believe Chris and Caitlin had truly come to rescue her. Yet before she could go any further, Karak burst in with a grim warning that enemies were closing in fast. Ju immediately told Felicia to move, and though she agreed, she also gave him a sharp look, questioning why he had suddenly taken to calling her by her first name. Ju was already running when the hiss of an arrow cut through the air. Felicia shouted a warning, but it was too late. The magical arrow struck him, forcing blood from his lips, and then a blinding golden explosion erupted, seen clearly by both Karak and Felicia. She called out to her brother, her worry unhidden, but before she could reach him, a Red Orc lunged from behind. Felicia turned, eyes blazing, but before she could strike, another magical blast erupted and tore the enemy apart. Through the smoke, Ju stepped forward, transformed by the encounter. He now wielded control over mana, summoning a bow of flame and an arrow of fire, his posture steady and his grin unshaken. He loosed arrows into the crowd of Red Orcs, each one igniting them in fire, and he could not help but laugh, remarking with satisfaction that even at level 1, magic was incredible. Just as he was beginning to enjoy this new power, however, a chunk of ice slammed into the earth behind him. Spinning quickly, he spotted a Red Orc aiming an ice arrow straight at Felicia, who had just approached to check on him. Without thinking, Ju raised his arm and stopped her from moving any closer. She gave him a questioning look, but in that moment a volley of icy arrows began to rain down. The reason became clear. He intended to face this threat himself. The arrows exploded around him, filling the air with frost and smoke, yet once again he emerged unscathed, this time having acquired the ice arrow skill. Victory, however, was short-lived. His foot slipped, and before he could react, an icy blade pierced into his body. His health plummeted, and he realized another strike would be fatal. From the side, Felicia called him an idiot, scolding him for recklessly putting himself at risk. Her voice carried both anger and worry as she reminded him that even among their siblings, he was the weakest. Ju knew she was misreading the situation, but before he could defend himself, he noticed that the ice archer perched in the tower had already been eliminated, as Felicia had dealt with it herself, and he could not help but feel impressed. Before he could speak, Felicia pulled the icy arrow out of his chest in one swift motion, causing him to cry out in pain. Yet immediately she placed her hand over the wound, and a soft green light spread across his body. The healing was swift and complete, and within moments he was restored to full strength. At the same time, the system notified him that he had learned the heal skill, an unexpected and welcome reward. Felicia fixed her gaze on him, asking if he was truly all right, or if he needed to rest. Ju, energized and whole again, assured her that he was fine. That was when the ground shook with a monstrous roar, and a massive red beast charged toward them with terrifying force. Felicia's eyes widened in shock as she demanded to know what in the world such a creature was. Ju calmly answered that it was a blood ogre, one of the most fearsome mutations among ogres. As the towering beast loomed ever closer, leaving them no time to hesitate. So, with survival as their only option, the siblings turned and ran, having not the faintest idea how they were supposed to face such a terrifying creature.
The blood ogre was not about to let them slip away easily. Its massive weapon slammed into the ground behind them, sending a tremor through the earth, and Ju could barely process how something so enormous could move so fast. Felicia quickly told him to keep the ogre's attention while she prepared some magic, though she looked slightly baffled when Ju mentioned aggro. Clearly, gamer speak was not in her vocabulary. Ju called to Karak, who was a short distance ahead, telling him to get ready for the same stunt they had pulled before. He opened his inventory and pulled out the magical dwarf dagger, deciding this was the perfect time to put it to use. Carefully, he pressed the dagger into the ground, causing a glowing golden circle to flare up and send a surge of energy straight to Karak. The orc could feel it immediately, a raw power coursing through him. With a roar that rattled even the blood ogre, Karak charged forward. His attacks bounced off the monster's weapon but never slowed him down. Hit after hit landed, his axe finally digging deep into the ogre's stomach. The beast let out a roar of pure rage, completely unaware of Felicia creeping up behind it. She cast a spell, summoning a slick, slippery circle beneath the ogre's feet. The massive creature slipped and crashed to the ground, completely off balance. Seeing the opportunity, Karak shouted and brought his axe down with all his strength, landing a critical blow on the ogre's gut. Blood spurted, and with a final roar, the beast lay defeated. Ju watched, feeling a surge of pride at how the fight had unfolded, knowing that while more enemies were surely on the way, they had at least handled the worst threat. At that moment, golden light enveloped him, and a virtual window popped up. He had reached level 10 at last, a milestone he had been eagerly waiting for. His protagonist buff leveled up, which was satisfying enough, and he also gained a new passive skill, Battlefield Blessing. The skill made enemy ranged attacks slightly less accurate when aimed at him, and Ju could not help but laugh. He dubbed it the Stormtrooper effect. Like in those action movies where bullets fly everywhere but somehow never hit the hero. Now, thanks to this skill, he could actually pull off those iconic protagonist dodges with confidence. There was no time to celebrate, though, as Red Orc surged forward again. Felicia, running at full speed, called out to Ju to snap out of his daydream. She spun and unleashed a swirling gust of wind that scattered the monsters like bowling pins, then kept moving. Ju stared in awe, realizing that what he had just witnessed was not just a spell. Felicia was channeling a spirit across the battlefield, moving like the wind itself. Even if the Dark Elves had some corruption in their ranks, Felicia was a natural-born spirit user, and a formidable mage. Watching her in action, Ju could not help but daydream about someday being able to perform moves with that kind of grace and power. He felt a mixture of admiration and ambition, eager to see just how far he could push his own magic and abilities. Just then, out of nowhere, a bright yellow arrow shot up into the sky, blazing like a flare and instantly grabbing the attention of Shutra's army. Karak squinted up at it, clearly confused, and asked what was going on. Ju, calm as ever, explained that yellow meant retreat. His mind started racing about what had gone wrong. Was someone in serious trouble? Had the plan completely fallen apart? Without missing a beat, Ju told Carrick to gather the troops and pull back, saying he would go with Caitlin. Carrick, ever loyal, argued that he should tag along, but Shutra shut him down, pointing out there was no point in all of them running headfirst into danger when the retreat order was clear. For now, Karak would have to trust him and follow orders. Felicia spoke up next, saying she would stick with Shutra. She was not the type to leave a debt unpaid, and besides, she had a score to settle with those pigs. She wanted a chance for payback, and to return the favor. Karak wished the siblings luck as they slipped out of camp. Felicia glanced at Shutra and asked if they were really heading straight for Caitlin. He admitted honestly that he didn't know for sure, but the retreat signal had him worried. Felicia, naturally skeptical, scoffed at the idea that Caitlin could be beaten by a few thugs, and Ju agreed, hoping it was just a scare and they could all make it back together. Felicia pressed him again, asking if he was really that concerned about Caitlin. Ju admitted that, well, yeah, they were siblings after all. Truthfully, it was because they were allies, but he wasn't about to explain that. The admission made Felicia look at him with a little more warmth, impressed by how sure he was about looking after his family. Before things got too sentimental, though, red orcs came charging at Caitlin. Caitlin, like the absolute boss she was, cut through the orcs, flames licking off her attacks and leaving enemies screaming in agony. More monsters charged, but she dodged like a master, whipping up an electrical leash and zapping a bunch of orcs right in front of her siblings. Felicia, watching all this, realized Shutra really didn't need to worry about Caitlin at all. Caitlin turned and asked why he hadn't retreated, and Ju, trying to play it cool, said he was just there to help. Not that she needed any help, obviously. Then Caitlin spotted Felicia beside Ju, and her face lit up. She ran over and hugged her tight, grinning like a kid on their birthday. She rambled on about how relieved she was that Felicia was safe, while Felicia just shrugged it off, teasing Caitlin for worrying too much. Ju, watching the sisters interact, noticed how close they were. At the same time, he glanced at his minimap and realized the enemies were regrouping and heading their way. It was time to move, so the princesses told him to take the lead while they covered the rear. Later, they arrived at the hidden portal room deep in the cave, surrounded by green orcs. Caitlin stepped through first, followed by the others. Felicia asked if Shutra had found the portal, and Caitlin confirmed he had, explaining he had made a huge contribution to their success. While Ju was off telling Carrick about his adventures, Felicia and Caitlin whispered among themselves, wondering when their little brother had changed so much. Just then, Chris arrived, looking genuinely relieved that everyone had made it back safely, and Caitlin proudly told him she had brought Felicia back safe. Felicia, though, did not look thrilled to see Chris, and the feeling seemed mutual as the two half-siblings exchanged a chilly nod. That night in the cave, Chris shared the news that General Vandal's side had also won, explaining that Yakujan, the big boss of the Red Thunder tribe, had thrown in the towel the moment he saw the garrison burning. Shutra looked confused, so Caitlin explained. Felicia guessed that Yakujan must have surrendered, but Chris clarified it looked more like a cowardly escape. He warned that if Yakujan regrouped his scattered forces, they could still face trouble. Tomorrow, they would target Kairam's forces, who just happened to be Kaichen's big brother, and things could get hairy if he teamed up with Yakujan. With that, Chris called it a night. praising everyone for their efforts. But there was still an uneasy tension between him and Felicia that neither could shake. After dinner, the army settled in with their rations, and Ju took a moment to check out the new skills he had unlocked. Aura seemed like his best bet in a fight, but before he could get lost in thought, Felicia approached, saying she wanted to talk. He asked what she needed at this hour. Felicia, with a sly smile, pulled him closer, calling his name and asking if he could take off his clothes.